Welcome to Separate Together, a podcast exploring what happens when we change not just how families separate, but how we think about legal separations altogether. Hosted by me, practicing family lawyer Melissa Bourgeois.
And by me, definitely not a lawyer, Cody Dub.
And just a quick disclaimer, we like to remind our listeners that this podcast should not be taken as legal advice and it is for informational purposes only. Because everyone's relationship is different, please consult a legal professional if you have any questions.
Hello.
Good morning.
How are you?
Afternoon. I'm good. How are you doing?
Is it afternoon?
I don't know. It's just been so dark and rainy.
Yeah,
this last.
Could be
and
any
I think
time.
we speak not only for those in Edmonton apparently this week, because my friends all over the world have been like, okay, so we're just under some kind of dark skies, just continuously. No summer for us.
No sun.
No summer. Yeah,
That's okay. I mean, I'm a pale-skinned vampire, so I don't need it. You seem like you're suffering, but that's okay.
But here we are, right?
Here we are. Today, I thought on the heels of our, to me, deeply interesting talk about law school and what that was like, we could follow that up with a conversation about another favorite topic of mine, which is lawyer burnout.
Well, boy, zing.
Yes,
okay.
Right? We'll just go right into the heavy stuff right away. But I think you have been in this industry, obviously, for a very long time, and you've had kind of a real flip. I think it'd be interesting to get your perspective. I get the sense, obviously, and especially in our previous podcast, that there was like quite a buildup to the decision to drastically alter your practice. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can infer, and I know that that had a lot to do with getting to a point of either I do this differently or I do not do that at all. Yep. And that's kind of a common refrain that I hear from people who are practicing in this field, especially, you know, as we discussed in our last episode, that like not many people set out with the intention to practice in family law. So I think the burnout comes quickly. You know, I don't know what the lifespan of a family lawyer is, but like it doesn't seem to be long.
No, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I thought maybe you could speak to the stages, if there are stages of burnout, or kind of how that happens. And then, you know, I love to end on an optimistic note, what you think we could maybe do to avoid that.
Good question. Yeah. So I think, you know, it's no secret that family law is like one of the hardest areas of law to practice in. And that is because the interaction between your clients is so direct and so acute, right? All of the clients are in a state of crisis of some form, whether they are even our amicable couples or the ones who are in, you know, huge states of acrimony and are completely lost. So first and foremost, we're the front lines from a very emotional kind of time. And then we've got all of these procedural complications and all kinds of areas of practice that, you know, kind of enhance or kind of build that pressure valve is kind of the way that it is. And so, you know, I think unfortunately that is where some will start in family law. And then it's just, you know, the pressures of your time being kind of, you know, not accounted for in all of these ways, and you have to do it a certain way. And again, when you're dealing with people who are, you know, from one state to the next, whether they're in crisis and then they're crying, or then they're angry at you, or they're angry at the system, or they're angry, you know, so there's just so many emotions, and we're not trained for that. There was no, you know, therapeutic kind of approaches to things in law school to prepare us for the very real human impact in family law that we have in particular. So, you know, burnout, I think, in this particular area, unfortunately, very high.
Yeah. And so you're kind of saying that it's a confluence of factors, being the emotional load of where the clients are at in their own situations, and then also just the enormous amount of work that's kind of expected procedurally. And then you're working, I mean, you know, this is not the proper analogy, but it kind of feels like Sisyphus. Like for every inch you gain, there's someone on the other side pushing you back down. Yeah. And so that sounds really demoralizing as I say it out loud.
Yeah. And, you know, those of us who went into law, it's essentially because we really enjoy problem solving, and the outcome of problem solving is a resolution. And when that seems to be continuously impossible because you get to one resolution and then there's just another one that came up, or another one that came up, or another one, then your job satisfaction in terms of your efficiency or your efficacy, like, am I actually helping here? Or is this just constantly, as you said, like, I'm just here, the boulder came up, oh crap, it just like took us down into the river again, and now we've got to start again, right? So it was just kind of this endless stream of problems, but with really this feeling of helplessness, at least in my personal case, that I wasn't actually able to effectively help resolve those problems because of the traditional way that my practice was set up, which is, okay, A versus B. So when we kind of are in that forum, then it always is me versus you, or, lawyer against the other lawyer, or that kind of thing. So that's where the challenges would come up, as I said, because no matter how great of an outcome I would have perhaps after one meeting or after one court appearance, and I'm talking great, meaning my client was like, yay, I got, essentially what I kind of wanted, then there would be another one, and next time the other person got what they wanted. And you have to deal with that, right? And then you have to deal with explaining to them afterwards, well, sorry, that court case that just cost you all of this money. Sorry that you now also have to pay more money to the other person's lawyer. And oh boy, right? And then, the job is that. But then the other piece is also, and I myself understand this, people don't engage with lawyers generally and they're not really happy to be spending all of this money. So there isn't kind of this recognition, like, thank you for the really hard work that you've done, because understandably you're like, I paid you thousands of dollars to do that job.
Right.
So,
yeah. So it's kind of like, if I'm understanding correctly, you're talking about almost like a moral dejection after just not being able to do what you would deem the right thing, because obviously there's an other side, and then the pendulum swing between like sometimes having these incredible wins and then immediately followed by a loss, and you just have to professionally acclimate to that kind of scenario.
Yeah. And you're always on the defense and the offense all at once, right? And so it would always be like, what is that other one planning? And I've got to kind of think. So it's fatiguing in that way as well, because even if you have great co-counsel that you really trust, you know that their job is not to be your friend. Their job is to be your adversary and kind of like bring that part in. So then you have to always be on guard. And then, again, you have no sense of like what's coming at you, unlike what we do now today is much different. But it would just be like, I couldn't manage my time, because if someone brings a court application back then, now I think the procedures are a bit different, but you have, if they've given you minimum 10 days notice, baby, like you're in it. And so you're like, okay, well, scratch my schedule that I had planned to work on this file. I have to be in court on this, even though I don't agree that we should be there, or, my client certainly doesn't want to be there, but there wasn't an outcome that I can refuse in that. So,
It's interesting because, when I liken it to having watched a friend go through a divorce, and again, like a relatively amicable, but still difficult divorce, she lost a ton of weight, like she looked very fatigued, and kind of the train of thought was always like, well, I can't plan for anything. I'm just constantly reacting.
There you go.
And it's interesting because like we wouldn't extend that grace to the lawyers, but like you're not just going through one divorce. You might have 10 divorces that you're going through. It's like almost akin to like a tax accountant during tax season, but for you, it's every season. It's all the time.
Yeah. And because these were my clients and the way that I have established my practice, I cared about them as people as well, right? So then those would be the challenges. I would take them not only past my office, they would come home with me in my psyche, and I would be thinking about that. Or, again, you would have one that was just, so painful that it's not, we're humans too, right? So you do build the shield. My shield, I think, was just never strong enough for me to be able to remove my humanity from the practice. Because the practice it's practical. You just apply the law, you do this, you get that outcome, you use the rules and procedures to get yourself there. But for me, I was like, well, these are humans and look at their heartbreak. And, what I do now is so much more profound because I can give them space for their heartache. But back then, that is a liability to you. So we're not here, you got to be strong and you can't ever bend and you can't ever, demonstrate any grace, or generally back, especially in litigation when I started, don't extend grace, that can be used against you, all of these things, right? So just a lot to hold, like a lot to hold. And so I think that's why, like, over time, it's either you find really great coping mechanisms, which is, again, like, this is my facade. I tried that, right? Like, I'll just be lawyer Melissa, and then I can be Melissa at home. But that never really worked for me. But some, I think, really great counsel are able to do that, where they dissociate themselves from their own personalities, their own ways, and then they're just like, this is my job, and I can clinically apply this in this way, and then I go home. Even the best, people that I know that over time still kind of ends up with some type of, outcome that isn't, the amount of, unfortunately, older counsel in family law that I know who have subsequently gotten very, very sick very suddenly, right? Like, it does take its toll, and just the stress and the weight of it all, right? And then on top of the practice is, many of us, the truth about family law is we run small practices. Right. And so we don't have the resources. We don't have human resources. There has been situations where I had been sexually kind kind of like there was tensions between the clients where I was just like, well, I wish I had HR to talk about this. Now I got to deal with this myself, with my own client being like, this is not good behavior here. You have transferred something. So that kind of on top of that, and then paying all your bills and making sure your Law Society dues are paid and blah, blah, blah. And then, you go home and you've got your life on top of all of that. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I can see immediately, like you mentioned, you're already blurring the lines by inserting yourself into this relationship, whether you want to or not. That's kind of the forced role of this. And then it does seem natural that some of your clients would project like a new relationship over top of that.
And I would try to be understanding of the deflection, but I was just like, simply because I'm a younger woman does not mean that you get to make these remarks to me or that you get to blur some lines of professionalism. And then again, that's challenging when, at least in my case, thankfully I had people that I could call and be like, how do I deal with this? But at the same time, it was me dealing with my own harassment, right? So there's that. And then you're just like, yeah, but I'm good. I'm good, right? I'm good. I'm good. And we try so hard, right? To be the warriors, and every warrior gets tired, right? And, some of us then fall over, unfortunately. Yeah.
Do you think there's a case then? I mean, I know it's kind of, at least I hear people colloquially saying like, oh, get yourself a shark, like get yourself just like a mean kind of lawyer. Yeah. Like, is that a way forward if you, like you said, are able to completely disassociate and just go and don this armor and this persona and be like, I am just known as like an intense litigator, just like a really aggressive litigator. Do you feel like it's possible to do that and then not carry that into your own marriage, your own relationship with your children? Pickleball court?
Yeah, I think, maybe, right? Yeah, just swinging it really hard. Like, again, I do think, for some personalities, it is different. Or if you're a legal purist, where it's about more the legal concepts, challenges, manipulating the law in favor of. But in family law, it isn't just legal principles. So that becomes like no matter what, right? Yeah. And, there's just been, especially in my early litigation years, like these pure horror stories, like they still stay with me. Every once in a while I'll remember them and I'm like, like I don't even know how I got through some of them. And the intense amount of pressure, like, you'd be in court and it wouldn't just be your client. They brought their whole family there to watch, and the pressure on you to get them what should be the result that they want out of all of this, and then you quote fail, or the judge did not, kind of thing, and then you have to go and face all of these people afterwards, and then P.S. by the way, I'm still going to send you that bill. So
of course,
like that side of it. So really, really challenging. And I think especially in family law, as I said, on top of that, we have the pressures of our practices that I don't think are quite as acute as other practitioners.
Right. And no, we've touched on this before, but like no real camaraderie. You quite simply can't have it in your interest. You can't call up a lawyer at the end of a really tough case and be like, shit, that went south, because that lawyer might have been, if not on this file together, imminently on another one. It's just such a small pool. So you can't even really like go for beers and be like, that was brutal. I really wish because you can't do that.
You can, but then the risk is also that becomes a little bit of a tool the other one can use later against you, because they understand a little bit more about how you work, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And again, in that forum of me versus you, it is survival of the fittest. It's not the best outcome for anybody, or for everybody involved. It is the best outcome for me. So get that and go, right? So I think like that is, and so, in my case, my burnout, like I have had two very serious kind of medical issues that arose during the course since I've been practicing law. And the first one was actually quite early on I was still articling. So this was, I think it was the burnout for me, at least, was part of law school. And then all of a sudden you get into articling, and I had great mentors. I had a great set of people that I was working with. However, it was basically, Melissa, you're done in law school now. We're going to drop you in here. Here's some files, go. And you're like, wow, what happens, right? And so it got to the point for me, because again, you're a junior lawyer. These are people's entire lives. Someone this morning said, like, you have played such a pivotal role in my life, right? And I'm honored by that, but like it's a lot of responsibility. So you have these people with these major life problems. At that point, I'd never even had a mortgage of my own. I didn't have children of my own. So a lot of this was just like, oh, okay, right? And then you are to use law that you have mildly interacted with, and you just got to learn on the fly. And so you got to learn on the fly. In family law, or at least in my case, you're also responsible for trying to bring business in because we need to pay the bills. We've got to figure out how, like, even managing my time. Nobody kind of taught me, like, okay, well, if you start your day with half an hour to kind of prep what your list is going to be, like, that would have been helpful, but that wasn't available to me. So I just had to kind of go. But as that built up, because of the frustration of the clients, because of the pain that they're going through and how helpless they feel, they become so dependent on you that I never could kind of gauge what was going to happen on the other side. And oftentimes they were angry, perhaps not necessarily personally towards me, but angry at the whole process. So that would come off. And so I got to a point where my phone would start ringing and I would actually leave my office. Like, the anxiety got so high because I couldn't answer the phone. And so I started therapy just on that basis of being like, why can't I answer the phone? Right. But it was because I didn't know on the other end, A, what you were going to present me with, B, I didn't feel like I had the qualifications to even answer that to begin with, and C, oftentimes it was also emotionally acute. So there were tears, or there was screaming, or there was other things. Like, rarely were people like, just calling to check in, let you know everything's going really great.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like, that wasn't it. So that culminated in what my first kind of medical, very serious medical kind of, outcome. And at that point I was so in it. I was like, I still have to article. I have to, so didn't take time to rest or pause at that time. I think the body keeps the score. It really does. It was just kind of like, hello, this is not, but I was in it and I needed to get through. And so you just keep going and you keep going. Right. And so that's where I just started to try to find my own alternatives, pursuing collaborative training, mediation, because again, by that point I was like, well, there's something to this. Like, I do like family law. But for many, many nights I would talk to my former partner and be like, I think I just need to do some real estate law, or maybe I go to work for the government where I'm not interacting with clients. But I would always come back to, well, that would be sad actually, because I do think I'm skilled at this, but I might just have to get myself out of the game.
Yeah. And you do like people. That's always been one of your biggest strengths, is like, you actually are really excellent with people, which, not to knock the rest of the family lawyers that I know and love, but like, that's not always the case in family law, which is very surprising to me. But there are, law kind of attracts a mind that really loves that kind of procedural element, that really didactic, binaristic approach and information. And sometimes that does not go hand in hand with people skills or soft skills. And so you kind of almost have to be this like rare breed in this industry. And you really are so strong with people, very emotive. But I can imagine the impossibility of putting in those boundaries at such a young age, exactly like you said, having no experience. So much of like what I do with our clients is just by virtue of me having 3 children of my own and being able to like really easily be like, oh, I understand exactly what you're talking about. That shorthand is incredible. I would not have had that in my early career. But yeah, I'm curious. You mentioned like you did really like it. Like, what were some of the reasons that you toughed it out, like that you stayed? What were like, where was the joy, if there was any?
It was the people, like, honestly, and it still drives me every day, right? We talk about this often. What we're doing here, we're moving a behemoth of a mountain one little inch at a time. And whenever I get discouraged, or whenever I think like, oh, maybe let's just stay down here, like, this is fine, and we're doing our part and we don't need to move mountains. But at the end of the day, it's these lovely people. And I knew that they, again, because I was viewed as having a softer approach or a humanist approach, like, they did seek me out for that reason. And I had started to build over time. I built my own referral network. So they'd be like, go to Melissa, she's going to be kind, or go to Melissa, she's going to actually listen to your story, or these kinds of things. But then, that was great, as I was able to kind of be like, oh, like, I can deal with these people and I can talk to them. But then my little self would just be like, well, crap, because like, I'm just trying to help. And now I've got this other side, or this other procedural thing that is like preventing our ability to get to any type of kind resolution, because that was never the job. And so there would be times where I knew that I was being challenged because other lawyers perceived me as soft. And I was like, this is actually a strength that I have. And we could actually just sit down and remember that they're humans, and remember that they're people who once loved each other and probably actually truly still do. That's the truth I can say now, right? It's just a different form of love. But that was never a part of it, because it's like, well, no, Miss Bourgeois, like this is actually the procedural rules. We will follow this. We will put them under 8 hours of a screening thing with, you know, court reporters and all of these kinds of things, because this is very serious. And oftentimes I'd be like, is it really?
Yeah.
like I know it's serious for the family, but like, do we have to do all of this?
Is this necessary?
You know,
it's interesting because, you know, a lot of what you're talking about as you are saying, like my kind of first gut reaction as someone who has never gone through a divorce would be like, oh, well, I don't want that. I don't want a soft lawyer. But knowing what I know now about, you know, family law, and especially here in Alberta or in Canada, like our family law system is very fair and equitable. So you are working in a system that is already set up for you to be rational, to be soft. It is the human focus. So it's not like you're coming in with this approach that is not grounded in the very principles of the thing itself. And I think that's why, you know, when you were like, people kept seeking me out for this, it's kind of like, well, how could you seek someone out for that? Or how could you work with another side? But it is the defining principle of it. And rationality is where we're seeing things going. Proportionality, rationality, a human-centric approach is where we are inevitably going. Exactly. I think you were just unfortunately ahead of your time and suffered immensely.
Sometimes I think that, you know, every once in a while I think that. But that's exactly it. Like, really astute point on that. Like, it's just, you know, again, it was a big challenge to attempt to bring humanity into family law, right? Because again, law is built on canons, and law is very interesting or very serious and all of these things, which it is. Yep. There are principles of family law, as you just spoke to, but they are embedded in equitable principles of fairness and reasonability. And that is where, because that's what I loved studying in law school, were these like, there's rigid rules, right? Like this, if this, then this. And then there was always, but if that's not actually fair, then we don't need to apply the same lens. We can soften that a little bit. Right. Yeah. And I think that's where the disconnect for many clients out there, they believe, and you know, we see them all the time. The law is black and white, right? And you're just like, no, actually, like there's so many nuances, because imagine how many different types of families and different types of relationships there are. So, I think it's interesting. One of the things that tickles me to no end is, as an extremely online person, I spend a lot of time in like Reddit forums or Facebook groups or whatever, not commenting, not participating, but doing research. And something you had mentioned that, you know, another lawyer has mentioned to me too, is like, in terms of referrals, they found themselves in like a men's rights group and then like a female professionals group. And it's like, you know, I want to say like, how could that be? Like, how do these two totally discordant groups make the same referrals? But the thing about it, and the thing about the online space, is like, those are binaries and those aren't real. And they're actually not discordant. They have a lot of the same interests, and it will be that you will vacillate between these people and find the ones in these groups to bring to the center. Yeah. It's just an interesting thing that way. And I think, like, you know, again, I don't know of many other jobs where you as the practitioner are given so much responsibility for emotional regulation, for also plotting the scope of someone's future. And that I weighed heavily on me all of the time, right? And when I couldn't, where I was just like, well, I guess I can set you up for a future for another month, but I can't help you long-term plan out the life. And that desperation of being like, but I can't decide on anything, or I'm worried about my kids, or all of these, like, I really don't. I mean, I know there's, you know, medical professionals that also, but at the end of the day, like, I see everything. I've seen your finances. I know the ages of your children, what their names are. I know you really deep secrets that you might just reserve for just your best friend. And I am essentially a stranger to you. And then I'm supposed to just have the mask of like, I'm not also a human. Like, I'm a, you know, almost I should be a robotic lawyer at this point who's like nodding my head. But no, of course those stories would stay with me. Some of them still haunt my dreams. Right? Yeah. So like, all of that gets embedded, and I think then builds up the pressure of like, right? And why some of them are just like, I'm, you know, like I said, real estate sounded so much easier because it's just a transaction. You mentioned bringing therapy in as a way to kind of stave off burnout and to stay in an industry that you were enjoying, although struggling. When did you, if or when, did you feel like there was kind of a shift in things where like you got your feet underneath you, the learning curve maybe wasn't that steep, you started to kind of understand how these client interactions were going to go and could start putting either procedures or barriers or processes in place that allowed you to do this job? If I'm honest, I don't think I did. I don't think it was very healthy. I did develop coping mechanisms. Were they healthy? No, right? I mean, there was, you know, alcohol involved some nights to be able to just forget and blunt out. There were mornings, many many mornings where I would just wait and be like, could I maybe avoid today? Like, I'm not feeling well, because I never felt well. So, might not have been throwing up necessarily, but certainly my mind did not feel well. I do think some people get better at compartmentalizing that. And that was what the therapy was really. And that's how I ended up where I am today, is we started to figure out what my core values were and what, so that was the challenge for me, is I was like, well, I actually believe in the power of love. I believe in kindness. I believe in all of these things. Like, I think that people actually could go through a legal separation, and ironically, I would later have my own and be able to speak to that. But at the end of the day, I was like, I think people can do this well. And I do believe that. So the more that I could kind of channel where I believed my internal kind of, these are my core values, then I could kind of, okay, am I still aligned? And again, yes, I continued because of the clients, but I also, had started my own practice, and there was kind of no turning back, because it was just like, well, like I could pivot, and I did oftentimes think like, I'll do some real estate and I'll do some wills and estates or other things that may not be as acute or whatever. And the best that I could do was remove myself as much as I could from litigation. So that in particular, the challenges of just also not only being doing this, but being being literally judged on my performance every day. And also the outcome to that was always just, painful. Like it was never, even in the best ones, it was pain. It was just so much pain. And so then just to attempt to work collaboratively with my counsel, make friends. So that was one of mine, start to make friends with other lawyers, start to share our stories, right? Start to normalize that it wasn't just my inability to practice or, my ineffectivity, because there would be days that I would just, because I wasn't healthy, there would be like hours that would go by and I just couldn't do my work because all of it was so overwhelming that I would just be blocked. And then learning from others that, hey, yeah, me too. Like that.
Yeah,
helps,
of course.
So that all kind of, intertwined. But by that point, like I'd started my own practice. So there was a reason. And, I wish I could probably dig them up in archives and different things. But like the principles of my early websites were always still like, I'm here to just make this kinder if I can. Like I'm here to try to, make this not ugly if we can do that. But again, did I feel the same level of, overall job satisfaction? It's not to say that my job is not challenging every day. I go home and I am very tired because we're problem solving all day, every day on repeat with very big things. But at the end of the day, being in that form where at least I'm not then have to turn into this pretend meanie, I can just be authentic. I guess, right? I can just be me.
Yeah. It's interesting hearing you say like there were blocks of time that I couldn't work, because as someone who absolutely packs your schedule, you are pretty notoriously known for just working like 7 p.m., 9 p.m. You will work through it.
But there were moments like, again, I had a sofa in my office for a really long time and I would just like lie on there just completely like unable, because they were such big monumentous challenges, every single one, and they were endless. So there was just kind of that like, the build up, I think. And then the crescendo happened and I really had to just take check of like, whether is this really where you want to be? Or are you feeling like you're just forced at this point, that you don't have choice? And as someone who believes we all have choice, some are just more difficult to make than others. That was really the challenge of my true burnout.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you pivoted to collaborative, like did that make a big difference?
I think, yes, I started to have, more lawyers, I think, that were more like-minded, because again, we all took training. We are all really wanting to kind of work through outside of the court system, but still within that, there would be challenges because some counsel was just perhaps more aggressive. And then your client's looking at you like, why aren't you fighting back with some nasty stuff? And I'd be like, because that's not going to help anybody if we keep throwing mud. But it did. Certainly it was like a softer way. But again, I had to have a hybrid practice for a very long time, because you can't, just have, some do now just exclusively collaborative family law, but in my case that wasn't possible. So
no. And I think it kind of introduces another element too, where again, from what I understand about collaborative law, it really is like a mental switch, because you're not going to the court system. So your tactic may have been like, okay, we're going to push this here. We're going to get in front of a judge. We're going to have this approach. And now it's like, you really need to use a lot more of your soft skills to make this arrangement and this agreement between four people now successful. And that takes a lot of again, if you're used to being binaristic, if you're used to being black and white, that's a skill set that you don't get training in, that maybe if you're not, like you in a kind of therapeutic environment as well, like how do you come in and work collaboratively? Fundamentally, it's the opposite.
Yeah. And I think what it is, one of the things that you've taught me or has brought to light, which is flipping it and making it about the client's experience, not ours, right? And so one of the things that I really did when I started my own firm was, these are people who are like really, really, really stressed out. So how about I make my boardroom as comfortable as I can, right? Other ones just cold as can be, like physically as well. You might have old coffee if you want, but like, and also it's just like, I'm the boss here, like, hello, I'm Sir so-and-so, and I'm the other counsel, and off we go, right? So it's all of those challenges that are just kind of mixed up. And like I said, with all of that is the world of holding other people's whole emotional circumstances, as well as being responsible to help carve out their future. And that's a pretty heavy load.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I liken it to kind of my dad's industry. He was in life insurance his entire life. And like, he had so much control because his job was to set the plan. And then when the worst thing ever happened, he just had to execute it, which is tough.
Of course.
Like when I remember being younger and asking him like, what do you do for work? And he's like, I go to a lot of funerals. And you're like, oh, and he's like, but they're always kind of happy to see me because they know it's taken care of. And I come with the check and I say, you've made your plans, you did your part, and let's go grieve. And you get that space. So it's kind of an interesting like inverse of what you do, where you get them in this like really hyper emotional moment. And then you're like, okay, we're going to dig in. We're going to make all the choices while your nervous system is maxed out and you're fighting.
And while the other one is also making theirs, but it is a challenge to yours.
Yes, of course, is in the way of yours. And so, obviously we've taken a very different approach here. I'm curious kind of like how long you lasted, if that makes sense. Before you were like, nope, we're gonna kick it up a notch. We're taking it 10 steps further.
Yeah, you recall, because this is kind of the inception of our friendship was in and around this time. And so, really was trying to fight the good fight, really was just working through. I got myself to the point where I got a wonderful legal assistant who was, very keen to help me develop a practice and a firm, because that was the other thing. I never got taught how to open files. I never got taught how to put things into a management system. Like this just were not resources at the firm where I was trained. So thankfully she was so experienced and in a space where she could be like, why are you running your own stuff down to the courthouse, you fool? Like, this is what runners are for. And I'm like, never heard of them. Right. So she really was like helping me, and I felt like I was gaining momentum. But again, it was the pressures of just, again, constantly not knowing what my day was going to have. Challenges were going to come up. Who was going to be screaming at me on the other end of the phone? Because it wasn't just clients, it was the other lawyers as well, or these mean emails. Like I'd be afraid to like, okay, what kind of emails are going to come in? And so I was just feeling like I was getting my footing, and this was back in 2018, just starting to get to roll where I was just like, okay, like you can find your space in here. And then one day I woke up and my face was paralyzed. Thankfully for me, it was not a stroke. However, it was serious enough that the medical professionals thought it could potentially be, but it was Bell's palsy. And so that's just a temporary 3 weeks, sometimes longer for people, but full facial paralysis. And I remember waking up that morning and being like, oh crap. And I had ignored, like there were signals before, but I was like, that's okay. Like we went to a gala the night before, water was kind of going down my face, and I was like, oh, that's weird, but I must just be tired. And then, so it was just the fatigue, the exhaustion, the stress of carrying not only, all of my client loads, my own personal thing. And I woke up and I looked and I was like, oh no, uh-oh. And then, different. but I was literally in, because this is how wild it is, because it consumes all parts. So I'm waiting to see a doctor in the emergency room, and I'm literally trying to text my assistant to be like, you're going to have to reschedule this client, I'm so sorry, blah blah blah, and like, don't worry, reschedule them till tomorrow or something, like just really like out of it. And it was then like, I think it was just, I had to pause and freeze. And but even then took me, I finally went to my other doctor, my real, the one that I seen since I was a kid, and she looked at me and she's like, what is going on? And I was still wheels spinning, and I was just like, well, I think I just need a doctor's note because I'm going to be sick for a little bit, but don't worry about this. Like, I think I'll be fine like next week. And this was really early in, and she looked at me with such compassion. And then she signed a medical requisition that I was like, great. Like I now have a law society thing in case anybody's angry at me for this week that I'm going to take off to fix my face. I'll be back. Don't worry about it. And I read it, and it was this moment. And she said, Melissa's on full medical leave for 6 weeks. Stop. and Melissa will be medically monitored for 6 months. And it was literally at that moment that I was like, you are really sick. And it was that moment that it was so challenging, because it was like everything was about to swirl out from under me. You know, like if I take this time off, I can't afford to pay anybody. Like I can't afford to pay my rent. What's going to happen? My clients, this. Instead of just being like, you can't help them right now because you're so depleted that actually your body has nothing left to give. So take some time and take a moment, right? And that, I think, it was a big moment. It was a catalytic moment for me. But what it came down to was I doubled down and I was like, no, I want to still be able to do this. I just have to figure out how to do this in a way that is sustainable for me, right? So that was kind of my real burnout, that I call it, where it was really this like, do I quit? And those were options. Those were really, you know, my husband and I talked about that. My parents, like, maybe this isn't for you. Maybe, you know, there's other alternatives. But there was just something burning inside of me that I was like, no, but I think like I really am called to do this. And I really want to be there for my clients. Just apparently the way that I'm doing it is just really not good for me. Having forgotten myself for probably by that time 5 or 6 years, forgot that I was just a person, right? Just, you know, six spin classes a day or six spin classes a week to keep myself, you know, that's all I needed. Just keep your stamina going. And I was like, no, my little psyche was like, hello. Yeah,
I'm in here too. Yeah. And I mean, this is not an uncommon thing, I think, medically. No. You know, I often get calls from people who are like, well, I had a lawyer and then they're gone, you know, and like sometimes they know and sometimes they don't know. But like it is a very common refrain that I will field calls from people who are like, I have no idea where my lawyer is.
No.
Just gone.
No. And in that moment, like, you know, for me, I was just like, I don't want to let them down, or like they're going to be messed up if I'm not there. So that's why I don't worry about it, doctor. I'll be back in a week, even if I can't, you know, and like at that point I couldn't even talk. So like, I don't know what I thought I was going to be doing, but you know, like I was just like, no, I have to help them. I have to do this. And, you know, but when the body just set down, and then when I had that moment of surrender where my doctor was like 6 weeks, I was just like, oh, I'm not allowed to work. Like permission
right?
To step like back, and then from there I was like, okay, objectively I've got to make some changes in my life, right? And so that's kind of where it all started from. But some of us, for me, it was, you know, it still wasn't minor, but it relatively contextually it was. Some of my colleagues, not so much. It is full burnout. It is, you are never coming back. It is, you know, I've read on LinkedIn how many are just like, after a period of reflection, I have decided to leave family law. I will be now practicing in this area of law. This was a really difficult decision. So very still common, I think, but unfortunately for many of us, catalytic stuff happens before we realize the impact it's had.
Right. Knowing that you wanted to return, did your focus then just shift to like, how am I going to return? In what capacity? Yeah. What does this look like for me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So thankfully for me, as I said, I had this wonderful assistant who did her best. She stayed with me because I was like, this lady's going to be like, oh, this is nuts, right? So she did her best to just kind of, you know, keep it going for me, keep it flowing. Of course, then, you know, there were certain clients I had to refer back to other ones because I just couldn't help them in those moments. But my clients were also, again, because I was still drawing clients who were drawn to me also because they wanted good things. So they were genuinely like, Melissa, it's okay. Like, you know, we'll be all right. But in that fast pace, you know, like there were 2 instances where counsel forced me to be in court, even though, you know, because the deadlines were going and my medical, and I was just like, well, like I just need a bit. And it was like, no, like we're doing this. And so I had to go in with, you know, everything. And then another one, we had something scheduled, very serious stuff. We have this. And so if I hadn't shown up, then I was threatened that it was either going to be a law society report or it was going to be costs against me. And so my client looked at me horrified when I came in, you know, so again, defied my 6-week but I was just like, well, I can't get reported. I can't do this. So there was, you know, but in that lack of compassion was a huge amount of compassion from other counsel, my friends, from everybody else. But there were just instances where I was like, no, this is a fierce place. And, you know, if I don't show up, then sure, you're going to have even more stress, Melissa, because I'm going to report you to the Law Society. So your choice. And I was like,
okay. Yeah, I think you're kind of, you know, it's interesting, like you wouldn't expect this, but you are almost like the greatest example of like, you get what you put out. And it seems like that would not be true in an industry like this, but it actually is.
It
like
really is.
Your clients, our clients. And again, I can't speak to the before times, but like they really, the relationship is not just, you know, lawyer, client, like there's there's so much compassion that goes both ways, so much appreciation for what happens here. And again, those principles of kindness and of ration, they really just permeate everything. And I think in that instance in particular, what you're saying sounds like that, where like there was a real recognition of the situation on everyone's part, and just a willingness to be like, I'm not going anywhere.
No, Melissa's doing her best.
And like, and I'm happy to wait for you to feel like you can proceed, which again speaks to the kind of like tone and clients, we talked earlier about like putting boundaries in place, but like as someone who's always spent their career in sales, it really is like you set the professional tone, the emotional tone of that relationship early on. And I think something about you is that you're just like really adept at doing that. And the reason you're so good at it is because like you approach our clients with that exact same kindness and rationality and respect. And so when you get it back, I don't think that's something that other lawyers can experience.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I think, again, that is, you are able to do that. The challenge comes back also, though, that at a certain time, then the other side is like, let's move, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't care what your circumstances are. I don't care what's going on with you. And I do think the profession has evolved over time. Like, I do think there's probably, this was a while ago, for me, but it really, what it did was just kind of challenge did I want to stay in this area of law? And then B, if I was going to, how was I going to be able to do that? And it was just really, it was what I discovered actually was the challenge the most, was that I didn't feel effective. And that part, I was just like, and I can't bring in these words that you just said, kindness, goodness, all of these things, because they get leveraged against me in this way that is like, well, no, if you leave space for that, well, then I'm going to actually take that and I'm going to use it to my advantage, right? And so that was the thing where I was just like, that's the key here, is I've got to be able to find a way to practice in this way, right? So
yeah. I mean, to be really reductive, it's like, what if there was no other side? What if there was just your that's
what happened, right? That was literally where I was just like, how can I do this in a way? And I had thought about perhaps quitting law and becoming a divorce coach, because I was like, then I can work with both of them. Then I can be honest with both of them. Yep. Then I can tell them the objective truth of what this is. And I don't have, a law society rules and procedures that I have to follow, a code of conduct, any of these things. I can just be authentic in delivering all of this, because again, then I don't have the other lawyer involved, because mediation, like there isn't another lawyer involved, but then they have to paper with other lawyers. So there was always another 2 lawyers involved. But this, I was like, well, maybe that's the path for me. But again, what my conclusion was, is if I did that, or the alternative for me was returning to academia and starting to kind of work from the inside out and just being like, we should need to, humanize family law. I think we should kind of meet the people where they're at and give them, like, it's not challenging for many of them. And so we can give them each, simple legal advice, and then they'll go on their way. But again, what my conclusion was before my eureka moment was like, well, yeah, but then nothing's going to change, Melissa, right? And you can do this and you can kind of, but it's going to still be the same. And these people, the ones who are vulnerable in the system, are going to continue to be, lost within the cog of the system. And then that's kind of where it all started from for me. And then when I saw the one lawyer concept, I was like, oh, look at that.
I'll do it.
I will try it. But again, and that is like, it's not to say that, but my clients don't ask me personal questions about myself very, very rarely. That's not the point. But what it is I can bring them, you're so friendly, Ashley's so friendly. We make some jokes with them. We kind of lighten the mood. And then we get down to the serious stuff where they know that I'm qualified to give them this. But then I'm like, okay. And then we just like switch the tides, but there's not that constant animosity, that constant acrimony, and all of those challenges of dispute resolution, all of that stuff. Like, I'm like, we're not just resolving disputes, we're just problem solving disagreements, or not even, sometimes they're not even disagreeing. They're like, oh, okay. Yeah, that seems to be good. Right. So just allowing space for understanding that good people get divorced and good people want to remain good people through their divorce. But the process assumes the opposite, assumes they're not good people, and assumes that they want to harm the other one.
Yeah. I mean, and I think like when I, again, as someone who doesn't practice family law, but works very adjacently to it, it's like,
you were in court school this morning, so
sure was. And it was dry, but it's, when you're talking about, like, if we're taking a look at the conversation we've just had, when you talk about those kind of early days as a lawyer, where you're trying to manage the emotionality, trying to manage the like overwhelm of the procedures and the work itself
and the practice,
it's an interesting thing, because you've managed to kind of invert all pieces of that. We've had many conversations about how intentional we are with language, how intentional we are with how we approach this. And it does the kind of 1-2 punch of setting the tone for the relationship, putting the emotions where they should appropriately be, and introducing the framework of how we're going to proceed. And it's like you've managed to create quite beautifully all of these boundaries, not just for you, but for them to then approach each other with as well. I think sometimes can be the point of mediation, but to your point, that is all surrounded and like foundational to the promise that you've made, which is like, I'm going to see you through to the end. So we will get to the end. And I think from a mind frame perspective, when our clients enter into that arrangement with you, that's where the real magic happens. It's like, we're not threatening court. We're not going to go like whatever. It's like, we're going to get here. And she's shown us the best way to get here. And we get to decide now, but we also know how to speak to each other because of how she's speaking to us. And that's, you know, kind of like the secret sauce, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you know, we all are coming at it from our different approaches, you know, but this one was just the one that was the only tenable solution for me, right? Was to just be able to, again, meet my clients at the human basis, give them the information that I as a professional hold, but also without the responsibility. I mean, sometimes I still, of course, I go home and I think about them, but I'm not like, oh my gosh, how am I going to resolve that? Because I've left that to them. And that's where they feel empowered and I feel effective, right? And I think that was really what, if I look at the journey of my legal career, like that's what I wanted to always be, is effective counsel. I'm here counseling you about the pathway forward. But now my effectivity is that I've empowered you to do that. Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you say it that way, it's almost like, you know, if we contrast it with your earlier kind of experience, it's like you've done away with wins and losses and just given them their win, which becomes your win. Yeah. But there's no loser on that side.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
great. Okay. Thanks. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Separate Together.
If you like what you hear or think someone else might, please rate and review us and tell your friends to tune in. You can find us at onefamily.law.